It is my honor and privilege to introduce to you my good friend and amazing speaker. He founded a company called GraphCool that does what my company does, but like 5 years ago. And he also founded Prisma. How many of you use Prisma here or have heard of Prisma? Yeah, look, everyone. Look at his face. He's like, wow, I'm a big deal.
That's not what I'm thinking. But.
He's a better man than I am. I would be thinking that. No, but founded Prisma. Today, his talk, I got a spoiler. I watched this talk last night. It is a treat. He's going to talk to you about the future of building applications. And it's insightful. It's technical. There's a nice thought experiment. It is a treat. So without further ado, my friends, give it up. Johannes Schickling!
Thanks a lot, Tejas, for this amazing intro. Feel very humbled to hear these kind of words from you. So maybe we can switch over to my slides.
Oh, keep my name up there.
All right. There we go. So today I want to talk about what I think could become like a new era of web development and app development. That's quite a mouthful, and I wasn't quite sure whether I should go with this talk title or not, but then I couldn't think of a better one, so I chose this regardless. But before going into my talk, I also want to thank you, thank the organizers, and I think we should all give them a huge round of applause. I've been organizing conferences myself, and it's like a huge amount of work, and you put everything you got into it, and you practically don't get anything out of it. Like, it's not that organizers of conferences like get rich on a conference. It's really like they're doing it for you and for us, that we have a good time, and it's a huge amount of work. And so I'm really grateful that like this conference is happening, that I get to speak here, and that we get to hang out in such an amazing location. I'm actually I grew up not too far from here, like somewhere in Bavaria, and like it just, can't say that too loudly in Berlin. Anyway, I'm Johannes. I'm living in Berlin usually. You might know me from Prisma, where we build database tooling. But around about 1.5 years ago, I had the chance to take a bit of a step back, do a sabbatical, and reflect, what do I want to do for the next 5 years? And so in that time period, I've done a whole bunch of like research on things I wanted to explore for a long while, and started working on a few different projects with different people. One of these projects I want to talk more about today, and it's related to one of my interests, which is music, but more about that in a second. So over the last 10 years, I've spent a lot of time building and thinking about building different kinds of applications. And usually, I grew up with like the LAMP stack, and the LAMP stack was already like living in the cloud. And so I've spent most of my time thinking about how to build web apps. And we put these web apps in the cloud, and that can be like a simple Rails app, a simple other stack, or it could be like a very complicated microservice architecture. But I've always found it tricky to work with databases for building these APIs. That's why I started Prisma. But over the last 2 years, I started thinking, hey, do we really build like every app like in this sort of CRUD way? Does every app have to go into the cloud? And so I started exploring new ways to build software. So in the first part of this talk, I want to give a brief motivation of like why I even started thinking this way, and what I found. And also then the second part, I want to show you a concrete example of a project I'm working on, where I'm proving or hoping to prove some of my claims here. So maybe we can start with asking a few questions. And I ask myself, whenever I run into a situation where computers don't quite behave in a way that I like, I'm asking myself like, hey, why are we building software this way? So if I were to ask you, like, what's wrong with current software? What bothers you? Network connectivity. Sorry? Useless error messages. That's good as well. Jank. What does that mean?
It means when things don't work smoothly.
All right. Yeah, that sounds like most apps. Okay. So I encountered a few different questions. So, for example, when I'm taking a photo on my phone and I want to share it with my friend, or I want to put it on my computer, why does it have to go through the cloud? And a lot of apps, maybe that's what you refer to with Shank, a lot of apps have gotten slower over the years. Like back in the days, like I used iTunes, it was amazing software, and nowadays, like Apple Music's pretty slow, and a lot of apps have kind of gotten slower by moving into the cloud. And also, a lot of apps I can't use when I don't have internet, and a lot of apps are even worse to use when you have bad internet. So I was just on a train here yesterday, and a ton of, like, I kind of know which apps I can use with bad and no internet, and other apps I don't even try. It's not great. And why can't I access my data that like I somehow put into all of these apps, and the apps hold this data hostage? Why can't I access this data? And another aspect is that a lot of tools that I came to like and use over the years is just gone when like a SaaS service shuts down. So yeah, all of these questions kind of got me thinking, hey, what are the qualities of software that we want? And from user perspective. So I think we can all agree on that software should correct like the way how it's supposed to be without as few bugs as possible. It should just work, and it should be easy to use. Should also be well designed. I like well designed tools that feel nice. And I think one thing that we really got out of the cloud is that apps have become portable. Like I'm using my iPad here to give this presentation as well as my computers. Like very portable, very nice. But there's some other aspects of cloud software that I think is really, really hard to get, that I still highly value in software. So I want to tell you about a few other qualities or ideals that I would like to see in software that we just very rarely get. So I want pretty much all of my tools to be responsive. And we have super fast computers, so we should really have like fast, responsive apps. And there's a few apps that I think do a really great job at this. So for example, I'm using an email client called Superhuman, and I'm using it because it has Vim bindings, but it's also because it's really fast. And I really like this. And this is kind of like the main selling point, is like a fast email client that works everywhere, etc. So I really like this. However, most apps that I'm using, oh no, this is actually loading our spinner, yeah. But like most apps behave this way, so that we just like loading stays everywhere, slow apps, etc. And that's quite frustrating to me. I mentioned yesterday I came by train, and I was hoping to like get a lot of work done. Kind of did, but a lot of apps really like weren't helpful in like the poor connectivity or no connectivity mode. And yeah, I think it was actually better at some point where I've been using Dropbox a lot and not quite like use all the cloud apps where I can work offline. When I have connectivity, everything syncs. That was quite nice. But I now like love Notion, but if I don't have connectivity, I'm looking at this message a lot, and it's basically useless. I guess we all, I'm not sure whether we like seeing this or we hate seeing it. Maybe we can go home early, but it certainly blocks us from doing our work. So whenever Slack, GitHub, whatever is going down, it's kind of, yeah, we're blocked. So that's not great. Another aspect is longevity. So I have a ton of apps that I've been using in the past can't access anymore. But it doesn't have to be this way. Like, this is just about like when I touched my first computer with MS-DOS. And turns out these software tools, like MS-DOS apps, they still work. Like, you can still open these tools, etc. They still work. Unlike a lot of apps built by Google. Not sure whether anyone liked using Inbox by Google. I did. It's gone. Sad. Killed by Google. Tons of different apps. It's not great. I want our apps to last. Yeah. And then another aspect, I think, which luckily gets more important over the last few years, especially here in Europe, is that apps should be secure and private. And there are some great examples that can lead the way here. So I'm thinking of Signal, which I think is doing an amazing job of keeping our data secure and private and valuing this. At the same time, having a pretty good user experience. Whereas a lot of other cloud apps allow for this. I'm not sure. Have you been pwned? Yeah, you should go to the website. I think everyone should raise their hand, pretty sure. This is a website that tells you whether any of your account got leaked, etc. And use a password manager. Anyway, I think every app should be secure and private if it has my data. Another aspect that's really important to me is user agency. So what I mean with this is that we use apps to do certain things, and not everyone has the same workflow, and the apps should be flexible enough and give me enough control that I can do what I want to do. So I think Notion here does a great job, for example, through the database feature, that you can just model it in a very flexible way to support you in your workflow. Quite different to most apps. For example, my bank client doesn't even allow me to search transaction history. That's quite annoying. And sometimes we even get agency actively taken from us, for example, by Twitter shutting down the API. We can no longer build apps that give us access to this data. And last but not least, I really like that we have now more and more collaborative software. I think this is a big benefit we got from the cloud. We didn't have this with MS-DOS. We couldn't really collaborate, maybe with a disk that we would exchange, but most cloud software is really nice. So, for example, I was just sharing a password with a friend, or I was just sharing a password with my own device. So that's really nice. So it is collaboration in a very useful way. Also, Figma, I think, has done an amazing job of building collaborative software where we collaborate in real time. Where collaboration then starts to break down is if it's not fully thought through. I'm not sure whether you ever had a merge conflict in using any iCloud tool, for example, text edit here, when you've used it on 2 devices, and you have to look at this screen here, where you have a teeny tiny preview of your different documents, and you basically have to make a decision based on a timestamp which document to choose, and there's no way going back. The other document is just gone. That's not how collaboration is supposed to do. Anyway, so I want all of these ideals in my software, and I think that's why we're here, right? So we want to build great software. But building great software in today's cloud-centric approach is really hard. And yeah, I've spent a good amount of time fiddling with these sort of tools. Are you familiar with CNCF Cloud Native Foundation landscape here? Yeah, there's if you don't raise your hand, good on you. But there's a lot of complexity that really takes to even operate these cloud apps. But yeah, I want to work on my app and not know how to put together these I don't know how many looks like thousands of tools that's necessary to fulfill all aspects of a cloud app. So I was wondering, hey, is there a better way? And I kind of started talking to a few different people, and that led me to discover a new approach to think about software. So I'm going to start with a thought experiment. So in today's era with cloud-centric software, our data lives in the cloud. Typically, here's simplified in one database, etc. But our data lives in the cloud. But what if our data would primarily live on our devices, and we would use the cloud to facilitate that we can still collaborate, etc.? That's pretty much how Signal works already. our data doesn't live in the cloud. Our data lives on our devices, and we can still like move on like we're using WhatsApp. So I'm claiming that we can, with this simple change in our architecture, we can get all of these ideals. We can get responsive data. We can get responsive apps, highly available apps, apps that last, apps that are secure and private, apps that give us agency, and hopefully then we can still make them collaborative. So this idea has a name, and it's called local first. Local first was first described by a group of folks at Ink and Switch. It's by some of the founders of Heroku and really great people, and I can highly recommend you checking out the article if that sparks your interest. And other people are also starting to pick up on this. So here's like Alex, the founder of Clearbit, has tweeted about this the other week, where he sees that cloud-first software might be the next big wave in web development, and I agree. That's my talk here. So what is local-first software? So it's really like it's quite a simple idea. So moving the data into the client so that local-first software runs on the user's device and can collaborate with other devices, other users. It's really as simple as this. Sounds quite abstract, but it's a really simple idea with a bunch of like technical implications that we now have to pull apart. So let's look at a simple tech architecture. Maybe before going into this, my first line here is like PWA. Raise your hand if you've used a PWA already. Okay, that's a lot. So please keep your hand up. And now keep your hand up if you've used a PWA that actually fully works offline and you can do what you wanted to do with that PWA. Okay, interesting. I'm interested in the two of you, which apps that have been. Okay. Okay, that sounds like a great example, yeah?
I built it myself, so yeah.
Okay. Well, that's quite visionary right there. Since like I'm thinking when I'm hearing PWA, etc., I'm like thinking of like the Twitter web app, which is cool. Like gives us like the skeleton app, maybe with like our profile picture, but nothing more than that really. And I think it takes an approach like local first to make PWAs that work offline truly happen. And so I think we have the technical foundation, now we just got to do the work. And so yeah, a good architecture for a local first web app would be to like follow the ideas of a PWA. By the way, it's not just that we're I think primarily web developers, but local first spans way more than that. Like actually, it's like most local first software right now like happens to be on mobile development, games. But like I'll get into that in a second. But from a tech architecture perspective, I think the primary thing we need to rethink a bit is like the data management. Again, like we're moving the data primarily out of the cloud into our local devices. So we got to figure out like what is a database that we have locally on our machines. Since like our phones, our laptops, and tablets, they're like very, very capable. They have like so much storage, so they can do all of this. Now we just gotta like teach them how. Also, we gotta, beyond like the database, we gotta figure out like how to store actually files, how to persist things. And for the collaboration aspect, we need to figure out how to sync things. And yeah, this takes quite a bit of work, but I think we'll get there over time. But what's the most interesting thing to me is like it's really liberating to have the server be optional. There is no server needed. Like Signal works by like just devices communicating. In the cloud, sure, there's maybe like some servers, but they're just helping to coordinate. They're like if they're down, it still works. And yeah, the cloud here, the role of the cloud is changing. It's like rather facilitating, it's participating, it's helping to sync, it's helping to back things up, but it's no longer the only thing that makes everything work. So I want to put this into perspective with like 2 other technologies you might have heard of. So one is like offline first, PWAs, just talked a little bit about it. And I think here the main point of offline first, we never really got there that the apps truly work offline, because I think most offline first apps have been really making offline, unlike the name suggests, a bit of an afterthought. It was always like a caching strategy. How can we still keep the data locally? But I think it never quite works if you don't make that the starting point. And the other thing I want to put it in relation to something I know very, very little about. So maybe you know more about it, and like you can tell me that this doesn't make sense. But my perspective is that the shared aspect between like the Web3 movement and local first is that we both want to go to like a more decentralized architecture. I think, from my understanding, Web3 is much more about like the protocols, about incentives, governance, etc. And local first is much more about the technical architecture, like where does data live, etc. And like maybe these approaches like meet sometime. But yeah. So I'm not claiming that all apps that we're using today would be a great fit for local first software. But I think a subsection of these are a great fit. So for example, what I might summarize is like personal tools, like tools that we want to actually do our work with. So these tools are typically things where we put in most of our data, we can have access to this data, we can, and like the email client is a good example. I have access to all of my email, music apps, personal note-taking software, maybe like Notion, for example. All of this would be a really great fit to be built local first. Whereas what I think doesn't really make sense to attempt to do in a local first way are more centralized platforms. Like if you have a bank, like as a user, I'm not an authority to tell the bank like, hey, about like transactions, etc. Like I really have to participate in that larger system. Or if you have complex HR apps with like a lot of policies, etc., I should not have access to all of this data. It should really should be governed more by like a central thing. So that's less of a good fit. But I want to concentrate a bit more on like these personal tools, since this is what I'm using most days and what I'm frustrated by when they don't follow these ideals that I've described. So there is a surprising amount of local first apps already out there, and a lot of apps that you have on your phone are already following this idea of local first. Like a lot of iOS core apps, like Notes, etc., is already working in this way, and a lot of video games as well are also local first. They work fully offline and then have sort of like a online mode that hooks into it. Dropbox facilitates a lot of like local first workflows. Calendars, to-do apps are typically built this way, and pretty much all of our like IDEs are also local first. I want to give a shout out to a few apps that like are a bit newer that are following this trend. Like Muse is one of the projects by some of the founders of Heroku, who are like behind the movement of local first. An amazing app that's built on this principle. Actual Budget is I think by James Long, a budgeting app. It's recently made open source, so if you're looking for like a reference implementation of local first, recommend you checking this out. And Linear and Superhuman, I think, are really beloved apps, and I think what makes them so great is that they follow this approach of local first. So before moving on to my concrete example, I just want to talk about like a few of the challenges that we're facing in this new world. So there is no Ruby on Rails yet for local first. So if you're asking like, hey, how do I get started? Fortunately, I don't have like a great answer for you. It's like probably read the essay and then see how you would like pioneer your way towards that as well. But I think there will probably be like a Ruby on Rails over time. But right now there isn't. So you got to think about like local like state management, like how to persist files, how to sync your data, And for syncing, there's a great technology already emerging over quite a couple of years called CRDTs. That's like how Google Docs, how Figma, etc., like does the collaboration. So there's already quite a lot of great technology there, but it's still a new way of thinking of like putting them to work. And like you've seen with this iCloud merge UI, you still got to think about like what is like a merge conflict. Like in like Git, we have like Git conflicts with like pull requests, etc. Like we need to build the same thing for our collaboration apps. And yeah, another technical challenge will be the compatibility across versions, since ideally you're not forced to upgrade your apps, but ideally you're still able to collaborate with other apps and other users that use your newer or older versions. And so you gotta figure out the compatibility across these apps somehow. There's also a really interesting project called Cambria, also by the Ink and Switch group. It's really interesting. And maybe a less technical challenge, but still something that we need to think about is what about business models? What about business models for local first? Since like with SaaS software, they are living in the cloud, it's like way easy, it's like, yeah, pretty common to monetize this these days. But for local first, I think we need to rethink this a little bit. I'm very optimistic that we're gonna figure it out, but still something that we need to think about. Okay, let's look at a concrete example. I mentioned before that I'm into music. Really like this venue as well, because in my past I've also been a DJ. So typically I would walk in here rather to play a gig instead of give a talk. But it's kind of like you're still always nervous. Anyway, so why am I building a music app? Want to give you a brief motivation. Want to give you a quick demo instead of product demo. I should really say like prototype demo, but you'll see it. And then I want to show you like a couple of like cool aspects of like how this app is built in this local first way. So why am I building a music app? I like listening to music, a lot of music in a lot of different places. So I listen to music on like SoundCloud, listen to music on BBC, Radio 1, YouTube, Spotify, Bandcamp, my local library, and I always find myself like having a ton of like tabs open in my browser mixed between all of these like Stack Overflow questions. And so I like similar to how I'm like using a mail client, where in one mail client I have like all of my email providers and email accounts. I want to have like one music app where I have like all of my music. So that's one motivation. But the other one is, even if I was just to use Spotify or just to use Apple Music, I'm claiming that these music apps that we're using these days are actually not that great. So Nat's been calling out Apple Music in this regard, that he gets frustrated with like the multi-second interactions. I'm mostly using Spotify myself, but it's kind of the same there. So here you see, like whenever you're selecting a playlist, just like look for all of like the waterfall of like loading state. It's like still fairly fast, but why do we have all of this loading state? Doesn't make any sense. So and to contrast this with our prototype that we've built, like here, every click, next frame, instantly you're gonna see your playlist. Like this is the sort of speed that I want to see. And so yeah, just quickly going through Spotify. Love Spotify, by the way, but like still, I think hopefully they'll get there. But I want the app to be more responsive, and right now it feels pretty slow and laggy. I want my music to be always available. Like back in the days, like when we had an iPod, the promise was like your music collection always in your pocket. And your pocket, like whether you're on a mountaintop or whatever, like didn't care about the cloud. It was always there. Now it's like not so much anymore. Longevity, I'm very concerned about this. Because Spotify actually keeps like revoking access for me to some tracks. Like some of my playlists look like a Swiss cheese because I just can't access these tracks anymore. And like, what if like Spotify shuts down some point? Like, this is like important part of my life would just be gone. So I'm very concerned about this. Secure and private, like Spotify weighs way too much about me. I'm just listening to music, but like they're really like analyzing all of my data, and like I don't like that too much about that either. User agency, I want to do way more with my music data. As mentioned, like for DJing, I really need to like annotate my tracks, like keep genres around, have like, leave comments. And with Spotify, I can't really do that, and I can't do it with any other app really either. And collaborative, sure, Spotify has a few collaboration features, but I would like to see much more in that. So for all of these, rant over about like music apps, but this has led me to build my own music app. It's called Overtone. At least this is what will be called eventually. There is already a website where in the future you can sign up to a waiting list. But Overtone is meant to be a local-first music app. So a music app that follows these ideals as mentioned before. Right now works on desktop and works on web. In the future, hopefully also on mobile. It integrates with a whole bunch of different music services. Right now, Spotify works and SoundCloud works, with more coming, as well as support for your local music library. And we also want to support cross-service playlists, syncing, etc. So I guess this is the time for a quick demo. So if the demo gods are merciful, this will work. And disclaimer, this is not yet like your full product. It's rather like a tech demo of like some of the aspects that we wanted to validate for ourselves. And by the way, when I say we, I'm working on this with two friends who currently do a PhD at MIT, who are working on some of the underlying tech, and this is a great collaboration. So, so here is the music app. This is the desktop version. I hope you all can see it. And so this I have here connected to my Spotify account here. And that has then basically pulled in my entire music library. So you see here, like today is Friday. Friday means release radar. I haven't listened to these tracks yet, but this is my today's release radar. With all of my tracks in here, I can go like through the various playlists, etc. And notice like that it's really like instant. Like it's always when I'm clicking on something, there's in the next frame it's already there. And I can play music, etc. And one aspect that I think is also really cool is that like if I'm going to this playlist, your top songs 2021, and I scroll down, notice I'm going somewhere else, and I come back to the other one, the scroll position is retained. And this works across like app restarts, etc. It's a really nice little touch. So basically the app state, no matter where you are, is automatically stored. If you were to try to do this with like a more conventional web development approach, it's kind of like ridiculous, like that would be a lot of work you'd need to do for such a small thing. But in this architecture, you just get it for free. So it's like a lot of nice little qualities you get for free. So jumping back to the, and yeah, there's also, by the way, a web version of this, which works just the same. So let's jump back into the demo here, into the slides. So what already works? It's not like what's missing, but what already works, because like the app is at the very beginning, but we have support for SoundCloud and Spotify where you can authenticate, import your own library, and play music. We don't yet support that you can search across the entire platform or that you just can sync back changes that you're making to the platform, but that's coming pretty soon. So we're all developers, so you're probably asking yourself, okay, what's the tech stack of this? So this is, I think, quite a nice collection of new technologies. Some of them we're going to hear actually like a full talk on today. So, for example, we're going to hear a full talk on Tauri, which I've been using for the desktop app. That, for example, gives me, instead of like a full bloated like 200 megabyte Electron app, it actually gives me a 5 megabyte Mac app, which takes way less resources compared to Spotify, etc. So it's really pleasant to work with that. For all of like the web tooling management, I'm using Vite, which is an amazing tool that powers a lot of the aspects here. For the view layer of the app, I'm using React. And for the business logic, I'm using a library called Effect. I think we're also going to hear a great talk about this today. Technology I'm very excited about. Language-wise, it's like 80% written in TypeScript, all with modern ESM JavaScript. And 20% of it is in Rust. That is partially to interface with Tauri, which is the starting point is Rust, but also for a lot of WASM. So for example, the entire music streaming is implemented in Rust and WASM because it needs to be really fast, and it needs to work cross-platform. And for encryption and compression, I've also started to use WASM. And it's kind of like a nice little shift in my habits of like how I'm looking for reusable software. In the past, I would have like gone on npm, looked for encryption, or go on npm, look for compression. And nowadays, for these sort of like high performance things, I rather Google for the WASM version of something. Because that has worked super well. So I've like slowly but surely shifting some of my code reuse patterns to WASM, and can highly recommend you do the same. Data management wise, that's what I want to talk a little bit more about. That's the interesting part. That's specifically local first, where we're building a little framework called Riffle. That's based on SQLite. And of course, I'm also using GraphQL in my stack for the data access. For repo tooling, it's a monorepo using Yarn, and it uses Nix for all sorts of like native dependencies. And in terms of observability, just to know like, hey, which code is running, debugging, I'm using OpenTelemetry, which I can also highly recommend. So here is the architecture of the app. A quick check in the last few rows. Can you still read this? Otherwise, I zoom in. No chance? Okay, I'll zoom in. So here's the big picture. Music sources on the left, app on the right. I'm gonna walk you through now, left to right, what's happening here. So we have the music sources, and the music sources, I have a component in my software called music source connectors. So per music source, Spotify, SoundCloud, have a connector, and the purpose of this connector is that it extracts all of the data from this music source, all the user's data, and turns it into an event log. So for the overall data architecture, we're making use of a data management concept called event sourcing, and that allows us for like this unidirectional data flow. So the point of these music source connectors is to build the event logs. And the event logs are very accessible to the user, are actually stored in your user's file system, so you can access them, etc. And these event logs are then imported by the app. So they're listened for changes, are then imported into the app, and are hydrated into an in-memory SQLite database that's running in WASM. And this in-memory SQLite database is then used by the query engine of Riffle, and then exposed also via an optional GraphQL layer to the React view layer. And what's really, really nice about this is that the queries are automatically reactive. So if anything is changing, you don't need to manually take care of like refresh, like listening to changes and like patching your state. All of your state automatically updates in real time when anything changes. That's an amazing property. So, and yeah, because we're building a music app, and music app is supposed to play music, we also have a sound engine. that is mostly written in Rust and runs via WASM, streams using the stream APIs of the music providers, and plays it back on the user's device. So let's take a look at what Riffle is. So Riffle, as I've explained, like it implements the concept of like relational reactive queries. Relational because it's based on SQLite, so we can model our database based on the event log however we want in a very flexible way, and we have like the full range of abilities of SQL at our disposal. And this React library gives you hooks where you can write queries either using raw SQL or using GraphQL. And what's particularly exciting about this, besides that it's reactive, is also that it's fully synchronous. And you might be thinking, wait, synchronous, like that's, like we want to build async apps, right? Because it's faster. But actually here, given our data is local, and most queries take less than a millisecond to execute, we can actually do the full query of our apps and our views synchronously. That means like in the first React render, we don't need to have like a loading state and then do like a use effect and like query something, where you can like in the first render query our database and we get 60 FPS rendering. So that's really incredible. And yeah, what might be different to think about is like that it's kind of encouraged that most state lives in the database. I was kind of skeptical about this myself, but like step by step, I've moved more state into it, and it's been really nice to work with. So here's a quick code snippet where on the left you see the side navigation of the app with like all the playlists, and the code for that in a simplified way is really like as simple as like using this use Riffle hook where we do a SQL query, select all from playlists, and that's it really. And like this updates if anything changes there. And as mentioned, I'm using GraphQL here. So it looks like this, that we have our GraphQL query where we just query for the playlist, name, track count, etc. And then that's it. So it's like from like how you read data, incredibly simple. And yeah, it's probably like a fifth of the code I would have that's needed compared to if I were to build this as like a web app with like a server and an API, etc. So really pleasant to work with. And yeah, speaking of benefits, I kind of get the best of both worlds. I can still use most of the technologies that I like and use of like a more like conventional cloud app, but I can really simplify the stack. I don't need a server, so it's like really serverless here. Also, the state management is really simplified because we don't need these async state patterns for views. And it's also quite nice once you thought through the data architecture, and this is domain specific, but here the event sourcing pattern makes a lot of sense. It's really nice to understand where changes are coming from, and the debugging experience is really amazing. So I mentioned I have like these database folders, these event log folders, and it's actually like you see it here. I have like different sort of backups of these database files, and this is because like I can simply, when I run into a problem, I just copy paste, make a backup of that database file, can share it with a coworker, and they can inspect it and like load it up in the same state, like the same scroll state, same form state, everything. And this way we can like have a reproduction right as a database file, which is amazing. And in terms of deployments, there aren't really stateful deployments where you need to do like database migrations or anything like that anymore. It's all stateless. Like if you do a deployment on Netlify or Vercel, like it's an immutable deploy. Basically the same thing here. However, it's also wasn't quite super easy to get here. Lots of pioneering work was needed to do this. It was surprisingly hard to synchronize the playback state from Spotify that also supports Sonos, etc. And unrelated to the local first aspect, it wasn't quite such a pleasure to work with the APIs of the music platforms. It's like, to be honest, it's like not quite in their best interest to expose all of their data. But yeah, it's like you deal with a lot of rate limits, etc. And yeah, implementing the music playback that's fast and still works with their terms of service was quite tricky. And the next steps that I'm gonna work on here is like syncing and version compatibility between these apps. That's gonna be quite a bit of work. But yeah, I wanna briefly just now circle back to my initial claim about the app. Like, I think it's very responsive. I am excited that it's like available everywhere. Like I can demo this to you offline. Streaming music still requires internet, but like at least the metadata is there. And with other sources, you can also listen to music offline. Longevity, my database files, no one's gonna take them away from me. They're always there. Is completely secure and private. There's like no analytics. User agency, I am control of my music library again, which was one of the main premises of this. And collaboration hopefully will be implemented soon. So yeah, I want to leave you with like one last thought, which is a quote I really like. We shape our tools and in turn they shape us. And I think a lot of us and a lot of our apps have been shaped by the tools that were built over the last 10 years, which is everything, like moves everything into the cloud, locks everything into the cloud. And I'm very excited about like exploring how to build tools and how to build apps that are more embracing these ideals that I've talked about before. So yeah, that's what I want to leave you with today. Thank you so much for your attention. I think I went a little bit over time. Not sure whether we have time for questions. If not, feel free to just ask me afterwards. It's the first time me talking about this topic, so hopefully I could do it a little bit of justice and make you at least curious about this. So thank you very much.
There we go. Let's hear it for Johannes one more time, everybody. We are a little bit over time, but it's totally cool. I think we can take maybe 2 questions. Does anyone have questions? At least 2 questions. If you don't, I will ask you a question, and then you can continue thinking. But the second question has to come from you, okay? Question for you. Actually, it's a 2-part question. 1, what was the biggest challenge in doing this? And 2, do you intend to finish this project and like ship it?
What was the biggest challenge? It's basically like, where do you start? Like, no one to my knowledge, has like built a project in this way and like talked about it that I could just like reference it. So I'd really think about this from first principles. And in the process, I basically rebuilt it 20 times, just because like 19 times before I got it wrong, and we'll probably rebuild it 20 times still. But that's also nice to me. Like, I want to build my software in a way where this is easy to do. And yeah, I do intend to build, like, for selfish reasons, really. I want to use this app myself. Yeah. So I want to at least get it to that stage, and it seems like a lot more people are interested in it. So yeah, I want to explore what it looks like to put it out there.
Awesome, thank you. That's a great question. That's a great answer to my question. It was also a good question, right? There's a question over there.
So the question was compatibility with Winamp skins. I was a big Winamp user. I don't want to quite say challenge accepted, but I'm intrigued.
Awesome, yeah.
Right.
I heard Winamp is making a comeback soon.
I think someone acquired the rights.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. All right, we'll do more questions after. Thank you once again, Johannes. Let's hear it for.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm so moved by this whole topic, this whole movement of local first and SQLite and all of it. I watched this talk last night. I got to see it again. Nice improvements, by the way. He took my feedback. This is cool.